Okay, so good evening and another very warm welcome, obviously that includes the weather as well, to this evening's webinar, Opening Up After Lockdown, which I know comes at a really key time with many businesses preparing to reopen the week after next. Now, there's a lot to take on board from the extensive government guidelines for the hospitality industry as restrictions are lifted, not least the extensive legal obligations to fulfill and ensuring absolute safety for both you, your staff, and of course your customers. So I'm delighted to introduce our three speakers tonight who'll help guide you through the many areas to be considered in preparing for opening. First up, we'll have Dominic Buckwell, who is a non-exec director on the board of YNGB. He happens to be a lawyer, and as many of you know, he's involved in various work streams and advises on many of the legal matters involving those. We also have Nick Wenman from Albury Vineyard and Sam Linter from Bolney Wine Estate. Nick and Sam are, of course, from two very different sized operations who can therefore lend a slightly different perspective on the issues to be considered and perhaps provide a little bit of inspiration as you look at your own routes to your opening. Oh good, we've got Dominic back. I was a bit worried you disappeared briefly then. Now, I'm sure many of you now are very familiar with the ways of Zoom and our wonderful webinars. Don't forget to ask questions. We really want to make this quite a session on those, and I'm sure many of you will have plenty of questions as well. We are recording this, and we're going to make the webinar recording available to all, and our speakers have got some slides, and those are going to be shared on the members area. So without further ado, I'm actually now going to ask Dominic to step in. We're all going to disappear into the background, and Dominic, over to you.
Thank you, Julia, and good evening, everyone. So I'm talking to you here from my home in East Sussex. We're talking tonight about getting back to business, and my task is to focus on legal obligations for wineries and vineyards with the new guidance that we've had this week announcing that restaurants, cafes, pubs and the like can open from the 4th of July. So I've got a set of slides which will be available on the YNGB website members area from after the webinar. There's about 8 slides to get through. They're quite thick, some of them towards the end, so please bear with me, but you will be able to go back and look at them later in the members area. So this first slide I've put up, I thought it was quite interesting that Tim Hayward, the restaurant critic, wrote in one of his reviews the other day that all around the globe, all levels of hospitality industry are trying to balance 3 things. That is, what is needed to stay in business, what the authorities are letting them do, and what their customers feel comfortable with. And I thought it's quite a profound statement, really, that there are these 3 things that you're trying to grapple with in order to really survive and get by. Now, my job tonight is to focus on the second of these, what the authorities are allowing you to do, and to focus for that on your legal obligations. So I'm going to briefly cover the Public Health Act closure order, which started back in March with the obligation to close businesses. I'm going to talk about the basic legal obligations, the duties of care that you owe both to your employees and to anyone visiting your premises. I'm going to touch on the raft of guidance for businesses. There's lots of different guidances which have been made available in the last 3 months. I will highlight the key ones. I won't have time to go through them all, of course. But distill out of them a number of common principles that really pervade and go across all the different guidance that is out there. I'm going to focus in particular on the new guidance for restaurants that's come out this week and talk about the outdoor space, the accessing outdoor space guidance as well. Now, I'm limiting my talk tonight to the rules that are currently in place for England. There's a different timeline for Wales, and Welsh members, the Welsh government, I understand, will be reviewing their rules on the 9th of July. So after that, there should be clearer guidance for Welsh vineyards as to what they can do in terms of hospitality events. So moving on to the next slide, the public health closure order. So on the 23rd of March, Matt Hancock, as Secretary of State for Health, issued the order under Public Health Act 1984 to close any premises or part of any premises in which food or drink is sold for consumption on those premises, and to cease selling food or drink for consumption on premises. So this obviously covered all restaurants, cafes, bars, pubs, whether standalone or part of a larger business. So any cafes or restaurants within vineyards or wineries had to close. At that time, the non-essential shops were also closed, and exceptions, of course, carved out off licenses and licensed shops selling alcohol, including those within breweries. So that meant that cellar doors could continue to remain open, but only for sales of wine that would be consumed off the premises. Now, since 15th of June, non-essential shops can reopen anyway, but subject to the guidance on safe distancing. So the progress over the last couple of months was really mapped out by Boris Johnson on the 11th of May, when he talked about a recovery strategy and a roadmap, which at that point would allow takeaway food sales to continue, but not on-premise consumption of food or drink. And on the 11th of May, that statement he gave that many of us watched envisaged easing of restrictions on hospitality, such as the on-trade, not before the 4th of July. Now, consistent with that roadmap, on the 23rd of June this week, he announced that the 4th of July would be easing some restrictions. And yesterday, the guidance was issued, and the link to the guidance there is at the bottom. Essentially, the guidance we're talking about here is an update of the guidance in relation to takeaway food. So it now covers not just takeaway, but on-premise consumption as well. Now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of the latest guidance, I just want to take a step back and put in perspective that there's two fundamental obligations you have to consider before you even get into the guidance. And the first one is your liability as an employer to your employees. And the second one is an occupier as controller, owner of a premises under the Occupiers Liability Act. So first of all, as an employer, your liability to employees is under the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act to ensure the health, safety and welfare at work of your employees. And under the Act, there's regulations which issued in 1999 required, as part of your ensuring health and safety and welfare, you're required to make a risk assessment. And this is something which we'll come back to, as it pervades throughout all the guidance about your risk assessment to ensure the health and safety of your employees. A separate legal obligation is actually a common law duty of care as an occupier of land. It was codified in 1957 to take reasonable care in all the circumstances to see that any visitors will be safe, people who are using your premises for the purpose for which they are invited or permitted to be there. Now, obviously, this covers your customers, covers your suppliers or contractors who happen to be there. It can even cover trespassers. So anyone who is on your land visiting your premises, you owe them a duty of care. And these are the fundamental legal obligations that underpin everything else. Now, moving on, the guidance Raft, as I call it, really is an accumulation of different pieces of advice that the government, different government departments has been putting out there since lockdown order in March. I've highlighted the key ones here and grouped them into two sections. The first section there, guidance as employers. So vineyards and wineries are in almost all cases going to be employers. And the guidance there for workplaces generally. There's guidance for outdoor and construction work. So that would cover your vineyard workers, pruning, and teams of contracted in labour or employees working in the vineyard. That would come under the outdoor work. There's also guidance for plants, factories and warehouses. So your winery itself would come under that. Offices, vehicles, shielding vulnerable groups. Now, as a consumer-facing business, there's also guidance for shops, for food businesses, and accessing outdoor spaces generally for visitors. And also, as of yesterday, for hotel and guest accommodation, if that applies to you. So there's a whole raft of different guidance, and I'll move on in the next slide to look at some common themes across them, because as I said, I can't go through every line item for every piece of guidance that's out there that may be relevant, but I'm going to try and focus on the key themes and then look specifically at the hospitality rules that were issued yesterday, which is called Keeping Workers and Customers Safe During COVID-19 in Restaurants, Pubs, Bars and Takeaway Services. And that's the guidance that introduces the concept of the new 1 meter plus, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute. So first of all, the common principles that underpin all these guidances and go across them is of course founded on the concept of social distancing, which we're all now reasonably familiar with. That was originally published in April and has been updated several times. But essentially that means social meetings are limited to 2 household or 2 household support bubbles, or 6 people at most from different households. And that's a key thing to have in mind, because that comes back into how you can operate restaurants. Now, the common principles across all the guidance is, of course, considering your duty of care as an employer, as I said earlier on. And that involves having a risk assessment in the workplace of risks and hazards to your staff. Now, the law is quite specific in that if you employ 5 people or more, you must have a written risk assessment. If it's less than 5, you can get away with it being unwritten. I'd still advise you to have a written one to show it's been done and show what you considered. But perhaps more importantly, and something which a lot of people perhaps aren't doing as employers, is consulting your staff on the risks when you conduct your risk assessment. There is a duty not just to look after your staff and to have a risk assessment, but to consult them, because it's considered that the staff are best placed to know what the risks are and how they go about their jobs. So when you do your risk assessment, you must consult your staff on that and not just hand it down to them. And then the guidance also recommends that you publish a notice, and there's an example there of the Staying COVID Secure notice, which sets out five specific things. And every employer, of course, will have employer's liability insurance, and there's an obligation to have in the place of work your employer's liability certificate shown on display, and in a similar way you should have your Staying COVID notice on display in the workplace. And this covers the things that go across all the different guidance about ensuring additional hygiene, hand washing, surface cleaning routines, maintaining distances, the barriers and screens you see in shops all the time now, marking distances on the floor to help guide people to the 2 meter distances, arranging furniture to facilitate that, how you manage your public visitors, the systems of entry and exit, minimizing handling of goods and use of touch devices. So a good example there is of the notice. A bad example there is of me talking to Jances at a YNGB event. So moving on, the key points in the guidance now on hospitality, and hospitality in this context, I mean on-trade consumption of food and drink, was only issued yesterday morning. And consistent with the roadmap, it is allowing from the 4th of July to reopen. Now, before I talk about the 1 meter plus and what that means, I just want to stress these 3 points. Firstly, this is guidance. It's guidance on how to discharge your legal duty of care. And the legal duty of care, as I've shown you earlier in the presentation, is to your employees under the Health and Safety at Work Act and to your visitors as an occupier. The guidance cannot be taken as exhaustive. The government is very much putting out illustrative guidance here. It's saying the kind of things you should do, including but not limited to. Everything has to be considered in your context and in relation to your own situation. And if there's other things you can do, or there's things the government suggests that just aren't relevant, that's fine. It's guidance. The legal duties of care, the fundamental legal obligations, are there in the Acts. Now, the main purpose of the guidance is, of course, to be preventative, to prevent the spread of COVID. But you should bear in mind that in case there is an incident and someone seeks to try and pin legal liability on you for having breached your duty of care, any deviation from the guidance that's been published could be used to plead particulars of breach of duty against you. Your measures that you've taken are only likely to be tested legally if there has been a problem. And in that situation, you will already be on the back foot. It's therefore important to understand, adhere, and look at the guidance, because this is what's going to help you, first of all, avoid getting into a problem. And secondly, if the worst kind of thing happens and you have to be defending yourself, to be able to point to it to show what you have done. Secondly, consider your customers. Your customers and your employees will range from people who are cautious to those who are more reckless. And in considering your market and the wider appeal, how you want to open your business and get back to taking visitors and helping your cash flow, you want to be safe. Of course, you want to be safe, but you also want to be seen to be safe. You want to have processes and procedures in place that make your visitors feel that they are safe. And thirdly, their insurances. As we've seen, a lot of underwriters have dived for cover in the pandemic, and they're not giving coverage whenever they can get out of it. If it's not already excluded in your third-party liability insurance, it probably will be on renewal. Obviously, insurance is a matter for you and your insurance and your policies. You will have an employer's liability insurance, which should give you cover for this, and you'll also have your third-party liability insurance for visitors. So, what about the guidance then? The guidance that's come out is very much consistent with the earlier guidance, which you'll already heard much about. The main new point is about the dining and drinking spaces and having table service only with 1 meter plus distance. Now, what does 1 meter plus mean? It doesn't mean 1 meter is in 2 meters. It doesn't mean that at all. 1 meter plus means best to keep to 2 meters if you can, but only if it's not viable to keep to 2 meters. Then you can reduce it to as much as 1 meter or as little as 1 meter, provided you've taken other mitigating steps. And these mitigating steps, if you're going to rely on the 1 meter plus, should be recorded in your risk assessment. And the examples that are given in the guidance as to what the plus could be will be things like the 5 points I've listed here. Increasing the cleaning and hand washing, keeping activity as short as possible, using screens and barriers, avoiding face-to-face, reducing the number of people each person contacts. Also, you are expected to keep a record of your customers and visitors for 21 days, such as will enable track and trace if a spread of the virus is linked back to your premises. So what that means in practice, obviously names, some sort of contact details, phones, emails should be adequate to discharge this duty. And of course, consistent with GDPR, you're only required to keep this for 21 days and longer than that. You should probably not be keeping the records unless you've got specific permission from your customers to do so. There's to be no live music, no live performances. Obviously, recorded music is fine, but not live. And then there's also this point about maximum of 30 people for larger gatherings, but only, this is only appropriate for what they call life events, such as weddings and major landmarks, but only if it's possible to maintain social distancing with 30 people. So whether or not you're capable of doing that depends very much on your circumstances and your premises. And obviously, if you're going to do that, you need to make sure your risk assessment is thorough and you considered the aspects of how to do so whilst keeping within the confines of social distancing. So the detail. The guidance is 43 pages long. I'm not going to go through it all now. It wouldn't be fair on Sam and Nick, who are waiting patiently to give us their real life examples of what they're doing in practice. But there's a number of points which are listed here, and you can look at them when you access this presentation later as to what you're expected to do. There's also guidance in there about toilets, about protection of vulnerable people, protecting your workers in the workplace and traveling to and from work, and about your food preparation areas. And throughout all of this, it comes back to those common principles. It's about signage, it's about floor markings, it's about managing movement, it's about cleaning routines, it's about maintaining that 2 meters, or in some cases 1 meter plus distance. So outdoor spaces more generally, earlier in June, there was permission given to open outdoor spaces and guidance given to landowners who were expected to take certain steps to provide safe access. Obviously, as farms and rural businesses, this is relevant to many of you. And this guidance on accessing green spaces sets out the approach to take, how you manage your land, looking after stiles and gates, signage, not obstructing access, but you could put up temporary notices encouraging alternative routes, those kind of things. And if you were going to have visitors to gardens or vineyards, to limit the numbers with time tickets or to members, so you know who's coming and going, and very much keeping control. There was the guidance about opening for zoos and farms. You know, obviously a vineyard is a farm, but it's not really appropriate to try and invoke guidance when it's about animal attractions as opposed to selling wine and consuming wine. So some vineyards are, I know, already allowing visitors. There's some on this webinar, some very eminent people who have opened their vineyards already to allow visitors. That's fine, but I think generally they've been timing the entrance so that it's not just a turn up and go. And then in terms of purchasing wine and food to consume in the vineyards, I think as of now, this is somewhat of a doubtful thing to do. I think until the 4th of July, if you're going to be selling food and wine to consume in the vineyards, you're sailing close to the wind. So my advice to you would be wait till the 4th of July, but then certainly within the rules about pubs, bars, restaurants reopening, that is acceptable. So finally, my last slide, just a couple of points here. I think it's really discussion points because the guidance sadly doesn't give us very specific rules as to vineyard tours, tasting and events. But I think you can extrapolate from the guidance we've got about tastings, tours and events. And this is my interpretation. This is not government guidance. But for a tasting, consistent with the table service requirement for bars and restaurants, I think if you're going to do a tasting, you should only do a seated tasting where people are static, no walkabout or self-pouring. You can self-pour if you're on the table, of course. You could leave the bottle for them to pour themselves. In some ways that's good because it limits the amount of interaction with the staff and the constant top-ups that you might otherwise get. And in terms of tours, I think, you know, one group, again, you should consider that equivalent to a table. So a table in your restaurant would be at most 6 people from different households or up to 2 households with their support bubbles, maintaining social distances within their groups. I think if you try to do tours with more than that, you're risking it. And similarly, if you're trying to do large events, there's this rule about maximum 30 people only and for life events. In every case, relevant guidance should be followed. Now, I'm now going to hand over to Nick to carry on and talk about his example. Thank you. There'll be questions at the end.
Thank you, Dominic. First of all, I'm just going to have to explain that my PC blew up earlier today, so I'm using my iPad. So I'm going to have to ask Julia to run the slides for me. So I'm going to do my Boris bit and say, next slide, Julia. The first thing I want to say is that, you know, this is very much an Albury presentation. I know I'm involved in WineGB now, but it's sort of our current thoughts about how we're going to handle the opening up of Albury. And I'm very conscious that, you know, the only thing that we probably all have in common is that we sell wine produced in England. There's going to be a myriad of different scenarios and businesses, some small, some very large, some who have loads of visitors, some who hardly have any visitors at all. So This is just purely what we're currently planning to do. In that respect, I want to position us, just so that you know, for those of you who don't know us, what sort of business we are. I'm planning to give you a very brief overview of the impact of COVID on our business, what we're planning to do in terms of 4th of July, and just a little summary in terms of how we see some positive business opportunities out of all of this. Next slide, please, Julia. Thank you. So first of all, us. We planted our vineyard in 2009, so we're relatively new to this, with mainly the traditional champagne varietals. We're very lucky where we are. We're in the heart of the Surrey Hills, right on the A25, right next door to Silent Pool Distillers. We get a myriad of visitors pass our vineyard all the time. So a large part of our business has been built on the visitor experience, and therefore direct sales to the consumer. We average around about 20,000 bottles a year, most of that sparkling, probably 14,000 sparkling, and the rest are still rosé. We're a little different in that you probably know we're organic. There's not so many organic producers in the UK. We only sell locally and nationally to an organic market. We don't sell through retail chains, and we don't export at all. Our overall revenue is about just over £500,000, and 60% of that revenue, probably more than 60%, comes from direct to the consumer sales. We have quite a lot of visitors for our size of business, at least 5,000 a year. And we do a lot of tour and tastings. Tour and tastings are a key part of our business, and they generate quite a lot of revenue in their own right. We probably generate £30,000 to £40,000 a year just in tour and tasting bookings, and that would exclude wine sales. We have a very active wine club, and we've also been quite fortunate in that since we started, we've built up a database of followers, people who have visited the vineyard, of probably around about 5,000. So that's been very helpful. Next slide, please, Julia. So how's COVID impacted us? Well, in common with most of you, I guess, we closed our vineyard from lockdown. We have more recently, over the last month, opened up for retail sales, but that's really on the back of opening up for click and collect orders. We do that just Saturdays and Wednesdays, but we have found that we're getting quite a lot of people come to the cellar door and buy wine from us. Obviously, we lost all our on-trade business, just stopped straight away. I'm finding it even now quite difficult to get through to pub groups, with some still furloughed and some still not sure about what they're doing. We have, however, again, in common with quite a lot of you, I imagine, had a huge increase in web sales. Overall, if I look at the sort of business profile overall to the end of May, we are down in terms of revenue, but overall it's approaching 90% of what we budgeted for. But you can see here that the variation in demand has been quite significant. Whilst our consumer sales have pretty well held up, cellar door sales have been at 34% of what we'd anticipated, or compared to last year. But web sales have been 220%. So overall, that's meant that our consumer business has remained pretty static. Of course, this could change over June, July, August, September, which are obviously key months for activities at the vineyard for us. Off-trade also been a significant increase. We've worked quite well with a lot of wine merchants locally, with a few promotions. I think it's been like Christmas for them every day, pretty well since lockdown. And we've just encouraged them to focus on English wines where we can. And obviously on the downside, our on-trade and wholesale business, we don't have really many wholesalers, only one or two, but they sort of sell mainly to the on-trade, is down at 47%. So that's that's how it's impacted us at Albury. Next slide, Julia. Okay, so when it comes to opening up, we've very consciously decided that safety is absolutely the key element to this, really. Whilst government might now allow us to have 1 metre plus, we feel that in that scenario, we still need to make sure that we are projecting to our customers a super safe environment, and we need to do everything we can to convince them that they're very safe coming to Albury for a visitor experience. We have performed a risk assessment, and so these are the things which we're going to say to our customers. And we're already saying on our website. So we've performed a risk assessment and comply with government guidelines on managing the risk of COVID-19. So I think that's a sort of a baseline position, really. People want to know that you are following these regulations. All high-use touchpoint areas such as handrails and door handles are clean. I think we're saying every 1 hour, but actually that doesn't really, it's not a big issue for customers, because we've also decided that initially, we're not going to allow customers inside our premises. It will only be outside. But in that respect, where we're allowing customers to use tables and chairs, we're saying that they're fully disinfected after every use. So we're recommending to continue with the 2 metre social distancing at all times. And we intend to set up all common areas, tables, chairs, for tastings and such like, with that 2 metre guidance in place. So we are not planning to take advantage and don't feel the need, because most of what we're going to do is outside, and we've got a lot of space outside. I mean, the only issue, of course, is the English weather, but we're planning to, with some additional gazebos and such like, set up areas which still respect that 2 metre distancing. We're going to have hand sanitizers at all entrances and exits. Our staff will be fully trained to follow government advice. We've got some webinar sessions set up with them next week. Most of these staff are casual staff, so that in itself presents a bit of a problem because they're not always available, but nonetheless, we'll train all of our casual staff in respect of washing hands, hand sanitizers, and various other aspects of the safety advice. And we're also, as Dominic has also pointed out, we're going to require, it says request, we're going to require our guests ensure that they only visit if they're not experiencing any symptoms of COVID-19, and that any guest who feels unwell during the visit makes themselves known to us immediately. So all of this is designed really to make the customer, you know, it's sort of a fine balance here between a fun experience and a set of rules. But I think first and foremost, we feel that we need to give the customer absolute confidence that they're visiting a safe environment. So next slide, please, Julia. So we have a plan which is still being developed. I have a meeting all morning tomorrow with my daughter Lucy to go through this in a bit more detail. But essentially, we're planning to control numbers by requiring all visitors to book in advance. And they will have to provide contact details in accordance with the NHS test and trace guidance. And of course, by requiring them to book in advance, we can put caps on the times. I think we're going to have half-hour booking slots, and we're going to allow visitors to be on the vineyard for 2 hours at a time. Now, this will vary from one vineyard to another, but we're going to charge a £5 entrance fee, which they'll get a self-guided tour for, and we will redeem that against bottle purchases. But where we are at the Silent Pool for the last 4 weekends, we've been absolutely overrun with visitors, parking on the A25, all grass verges, people just looking for a place to have picnics. And we absolutely can't open up the vineyard generally to this mass of visitors to our area. So we're planning to charge an entrance fee. They'll have to pre-book for that, but they will get that refunded if they buy a bottle from us. We have a whole pile of bookings that were cancelled for tours and tastings, cheese and wine tastings, and clearly we need to give them priority. So we've already sent out emails to all of those people with information, allowing them to rebook from July onwards. I've mentioned already we're only going to allow access to outside areas. And to facilitate that, we are planning to get some more gazebos in case the weather isn't too good. For us, we're going to separate visitors to the vineyard from a takeaway retail sales area, just to avoid congestion. And once visitors are on the vineyard, there'll be another point where they can buy drinks from us. Now, tour and tastings group, it was interesting, Dominic said 6. We're planning to reduce from 25 to 10 people. And I think we're probably going to stick with that 10 because we are confident that we can maintain the 2 meter social distancing for 5 groups of 2. And obviously some of those groups will be more than 2. I guess we might get the odd single visitor, but we're confident that we can maintain that social distancing of 2 meters for 10 people on tours. Tastings is a little bit trickier, but again, we'll have preset tables with the 2 meters in place for those people with the drinks already poured before they get back for their tasting. Food and drink will allow picnics in designated areas, but we are going to designate picnic areas and also be clear about the tour and tasting routes. We are going to have an additional package for lunch and teas with gazebo if raining, but we'll charge people extra for that. And obviously, we're looking carefully at packaging with disposable for the bins attached as well. So next slide, please, Julia. So lastly, I just wanted to throw in a few positive things. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to position Albury Vineyard. We're going to aim to position Albury Vineyard as a super safe location for visitors. I think vineyards, do have a real opportunity to project themselves as such to the public because of the amount of space we have. And therefore, we want to take advantage, obviously, of what we think there will be an expected increase in demand for local visitor experiences, provided people believe it's safe. From a business perspective, we'd like to see if we can maintain the increased levels of website orders, but then move back to, certainly for next year, the same levels of business that we had previously for cellar door sales. So, our business aim would be to move from 60 to 75% direct sales, which are obviously much more profitable from next year onwards. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you. I hope I haven't gone over time too much. A little bit, maybe. But over to you, Sam.
Nick. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to go along very much the same trajectory that Nick did with what we did and our business. So I managed to go too far on my slide. Sorry. So I introduced Bolney very quickly, and then talk about what we did immediately when lockdown has happened, and then how we work through there into opening up, on which we will be on the 4th, and then some wins and some decisions, business decisions we made in this situation to help us move to the new normal and what that means for us going forwards. So those of you that don't know Bolney, we started in 1972, started by my parents, and it's now a 3-generation family business. We have 140-acre vineyards split across 2 sites within 2 miles of the original site in Bolney. We have sandstone soils, and we specialise in still, red, white, and rosé wines, as well as traditional method sparkling. So we really do make everything apart from sweet wines. We also do a gin and a vermouth as well now. So we really expanded what we're doing and our offering. We will be making around 200,000 bottles this year. And as you can see from the photo, they're actually quite a big site. This is just on one of our main vineyards here. And we have a big cafe area on the first floor of the building at the top of the picture you can see there, and a big balcony. And even with tables spread out for 2 meters for social distancing, we can still seat 48 inside and 20 plus outside. So we've got a lot of space. And what we've tended to do, because we're a big site, is over the last few years, we've had 9,000 people coming through on tours. It's been very successful for us as a business. And we usually see around 70,000 people a year coming through this estate, either to visit the shop or the cafe, or to come and do any of our events as well. So lockdown, I think, was a shock for all of us. Not overly helpful starting off for Mothering Sunday, because we had a lot planned here at Bolney, but we decided as a business we had to adapt very, very quickly. One of the things we started to do is essential food boxes. Our suppliers for our cafe had food and they had nobody to sell it to. So we decided that we'd start selling those on our website, and that went really well. We then also delivered them for free. And because we did that and we kept the shop open, we actually, and how we click and collect, like Nick's just mentioned, we actually started to have customers coming through again fairly quickly. So we were already thinking of how we do social distancing, how we keep them safe, and putting one-way systems in. So we've been doing that now for the last 2 or 3 months, and we've really actually got a very good system running, and how we've learned to do that. So that's been really helpful to us. And it was just nice to be able to help some of our local customers out with food when they didn't want to go to supermarkets. So it just felt like a nice thing to do. Kept us busy as well. Very much the on-trade, and I expect a lot of you that work with the on-trade, that just stopped overnight. And we relied on that as around about 70% of our wine sales, our trade sales business. So it was quite significant for us. So the first thing we said to ourselves is, well, we need to come out of this with the minimum borrowing and debt repayments to help the business cope through this period. So we had to come up with some ideas. We were about to do a major building development on the site. We were putting in a huge farm shop, more hospitality rooms, more event rooms, and we stopped that immediately and decided that actually what we should do is focus on developing the e-commerce. I think there's a lot of us saw that did have websites. E-commerce took off, online sales took off very, very quickly. And actually, we discovered that our online sales fairly quickly went to 1,000% growth. But that was mainly due to the fact that obviously people were visiting the website, but also we immediately just did everything we could to the current website we had. We were lucky enough to have a Shopify website, and then we were able to add lots of apps to it to make it easier for people to buy. We did a lot of work, and the team worked incredibly hard in those first few weeks to actually get the website to a place where we could actually maximize on sales. And that really made a big difference to our business. What we've learned from that is actually we want to keep that side of the business growing, and we do see a future in that. So we've actually now got a digital agency building a whole new e-commerce business and website for us. One of the other things we considered doing, and I think a lot of vineyards would have done this, is should we stop working on some of the vineyards? Should we abandon some of the sites that we have and not grow grapes, or not harvest grapes from this year and make wine from this year? Because obviously the cost of stock production is quite high, and we were looking at next year's cash flow as well as this year's cash flow. We actually spoke to our bank about this, and one of the things we were very lucky with, they were very keen that we actually carried on making stock, and we have a stock financing facility with them when they're just beginning to come out. And I know WineGB have done a seminar, or we're about to do a seminar on that, and that is actually really useful. So we're carrying on making stock, and the money that we need to borrow to get through this, they're going to lend us on the stock we're making. So that's been really good. So talking about the website, we started to put the new products on there. We started selling food and other items. And the reason we did that, we were about to launch a farm shop. We'd already sourced suppliers. We'd tried lots of samples of everything. We'd already looked at what we were going to put in the farm shop, and we thought, well, why not put that on the website? And that's what we did. And that worked really well for us. We've also started many new initiatives. And I talked with one of the things we did do is local butcher was finding that he was selling a lot from the butchers, but he also needed to sell more because all of his hospitality trade business had gone. So we started putting meat packs together, and selling for him as well. And they sold extraordinarily well and still do on our website, and people click and collect, or we deliver locally for that as well. And then the other thing we've been very successful at, we have a cafe, we have chefs. So we started looking at picnic boxes that people could take away with them. And we've got the classic picnic, we've got a vegan picnic, and we've got a cream tea option. And we sold out of, we only have click and collect of those 2 days a week, Friday and Saturday. And the first week we launched, we sold over 100. And that's been really good. We've also do takeaway menus sometimes, especially for special events. So all the roast dinners we had already prepped and prepared for our Mother's Day big event that we had, we actually then had them as takeaway, and that worked really well. The other thing we've done is virtual wine tastings. I know some other vineyards have done that. That's been very successful for everybody that's done it, I believe. Certainly very, very well received. We actually had a couple who were due to get married sign up for one of our virtual tastings with their friends and family on their what would have been their wedding day, and that was really nice to share that with them. We're really lucky. As I said, we have a big site. There's a lot of room on our site to welcome people. So we're working on how we do picnics around the vineyard. We've created spaces for that. We're getting picnic tables out for social distancing, and we'll focus a lot on that as well. And all of this that we've done, all that we did immediately, and we did do it immediately, has actually helped us bring back some of the income we've lost from the on-trade just completely stopping overnight, and the looming recession and the threat of what that would potentially do to our revenues as well. So thinking that through. We are very excited. We cannot wait to be open. So 4th of July, we will be opening the cafe, and as I said before, we've got a lot of space. We have spent a lot of time working on the social distancing for this. We've working on the one-way system that we developed when we were doing the food boxes and just having the wine shop open. We've got sanitizers on every entrance and exit. We've done risk assessments, and it was interesting, Dominic, you were saying earlier, the government's the health and safety guidelines state that we should get consultation with our teams, our employees, to do the risk assessments and not just do them ourselves. We actually give our risk assessments to our teams, and we ask them to compile them themselves. I have very lucky that Size Bolney is we actually have a compliance officer for 2 days a week, and he works with them to help them fill them out correctly, understand the rules, the legislation, what we have to do, but they actually create the risk assessments. So we've recently done one. I don't know if you can actually see if I hold it up. It's hard to see, but we've done one that's just for bringing tours back, and that's 4 pages long, and it's covered every element of what we need to do for bringing tours back. So opening control measures, talking them about more, as I said, risk assessments for every single area we work, so that the business can understand better the risk of spreading the virus through interactions with the team, other colleagues, tradespeople that come in, suppliers and customers. So we've thought about every person, every human being that comes through Bolney Wine Estate and the contact we have with them and how we do that. We've then looked at all the key controls that we need to put in place. So we've actually gone through this in great detail. As I say, we're a big site. We do have a lot of people coming through. 48 people in the cafe with proper social distancing is still a lot of people to manage. So like Nick said, we will be sanitizing the tables and chairs and door handles between every visit. We have booked the tables are booking, so people are staggered. People can't arrive together. We have 15 minutes staggering between everybody coming, and there's an hour and a half maximum stay in the cafe now as well. We thought that would inhibit people coming back. We launched the booking system yesterday, and we have had a flood of people coming through and booking, not just for the opening weekend, the 4th and the 5th of July, but for the next few weeks after that as well. And we did wonder if people would want to come back out and come to the cafe, and if it's something that people wanted to risk, and actually very much they are doing so, which we found quite interesting, more than we thought. We have worked on physical contact, obviously no physical contact. We will be using face screens for all of the staff that will be taking food to a customer, and the same on the tours. When we do the tour food, we will be looking at doing that in picnic boxes, pre-packed picnic boxes with people's names on them. There'll be nothing, and they'll be left on the table ready with glasses of wine, taster samples already poured. So when people come back from their walk around the vineyard and winery, they come back in couples or in groups, one at a time, and then they go straight directly to the table that we've assigned to them. And that's how we're going to do that. If staff are showing symptoms, we'd have a policy for that. As soon as anybody has any symptom at all, even if it's just one, they immediately go home, they get tested that day, and they don't come back until they've either had a clear test or they're free of symptoms. We put Perspex screen in the shopping cafe to help with distancing with people, with customers paying. Everything's done by credit card. There's no cash now. The chefs working in the kitchen are wearing face masks. They also wear gloves, and all of the staff actually are wearing gloves as well. So we've tried to put all of these measures in place to protect the staff as well as protect the customers. And that's been working fairly well for us up till now, but we're going to do more of that as people come back in. Sterilising crockery and glasses obviously is a must that we must do. Like Nick, we've taken our tour numbers down. We usually do 30 people on a tour. We've also taken them down to 10. And we've made that assumption based on feeling that if the cafe can be open and have an unlimited amount of people, then if we've got the space to correctly social distance people, we should be able to do that on the tours too. So we've made that assumption ourselves. And I just wanted to say, for me, and Dominic, you can tell me whether you think this is correct or not to share with the members, but for me, if you interpret these are guidelines, there's no direct legislation for what's come out that says you can and can't do this. So the attitude we've taken is we will interpret it to the best that we can, but we'll write risk assessments around everything. We will document everything so that we can show at every stage we've thought it through to keep everybody safe, and we've done every bit of due diligence we possibly can. And that's how we think we can protect us, and we think we can protect our customers. As I said, we've got picnic areas around the vineyard and a lovely outside balcony seating, so lots of fresh air. We've actually set the tables at 2 meters. We did consider at 1+, but we actually did push that to 2 in the end. We've got plenty of room, so we were lucky to be able to do that. And that's what we've done with control measures. That's a really brief, and if anybody's got any questions on more control measures we have, there's a lot that we have done, but that's just a brief overview, and I know we're short of time. And I thought you might like to see a little bit of a pretty picture to finish with. These are the picnic boxes in the top right-hand corner that we did. They're just out on platters and just the food that we'll be doing when people come back to the cafe. But as I say, we're really looking forward to welcoming people back. We won't have anywhere near the visitors we normally have. We know that. And we've restructured the business around knowing that the business will be smaller for the foreseeable future. We'll have less customers, we'll sell less wine, and we understand that. So we've restructured on that basis. But we will, like everybody else, move forward, and looking forward to actually beginning to start doing things again. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Sam, thank you so much, and to Nick and to Dominic as well. We've obviously, and not unsurprisingly, had quite a few questions come in, and Dominic, thank you. I noticed that you've been answering some. I think that most people can actually see some of the responses to some of those questions. What we'll make sure we do is that we publish those Q&As as well, because we're obviously not going to be able to cover all of them in the time that we have left. There are one or two, most of them inevitably are directed at Dominic, because it is about some of the advice that has come out, and I know that your answers will be invaluable. Dominic, I know that there are one or two that you've marked up that you'd like to answer, so if we just ask Lucy Leckley, with respect to the table service only advice, does this mean we can't sell wine and food, e.g. picnic boxes, takeaway style, i.e. from a hatch or pop-up bar for people to eat on the vineyard, not at a table? Are you on mute? Because I can't seem to have lost you. Can anybody else hear?
No.
No. It's a bit strange. Yeah. It's okay. Nick, you can't hear.
I can hear you. I can't hear Dominic. It does say he's on.
It does say you're on.
Perhaps he's gone off to get a cocktail.
It's a sensible idea. I want one of yours, Nick.
I'm going to. If I mute you and unmute you, I don't know that's going to help or not, but let's try. Dominic, does that work? Not at the moment. No. Okay. Yeah, we can't hear you, Nick. We can't hear you, I'm afraid, Dominic. Okay, he's gone out and come back in. Just whilst that is being sorted, actually, we do have a question to actually both you, Sam, and Nick. Curious what additional measures around toilet facilities are planned at Bolney and Albury. Nick, would you like to start first?
Yeah, we're still debating this, to be honest. I mean, we've made a decision in principle not to let people into our barn. And that's where the toilets are. So we've actually got a couple of portaloos coming at the moment, but then we have to, we have to make sure that we're clear about the level to which we are cleaning the portaloos, and secondly, we will be putting a notice on the loos, which requires visitors or requests that visitors self-clean the loos after use as well, to a degree. So we'll be giving instructions to that respect. We're still having a debate about giving a sort of one in, one out type access to the vineyard, to the loos that we have there. But at the moment, we're sticking with, in our particular case, I think, a policy of people staying outside.
Sam, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, we've had this has been the head scratcher for us. It's the hardest thing to deal with. You have to access our toilets. You go down a corridor that's just over a metre and a half, almost 2 metres wide. So for people to walk past each other in that corridor and maintain a metre plus distance is doable, but very difficult. So we're putting up signs of a kind of priority of walk and not, so people have to stop and wait if somebody's coming up. We've also got staff trained up to monitor that. We've got staff who will be going in with antibacterial spray and just cleaning down the surfaces and the handles regularly as well. So at the moment we're looking at every 15 minutes to half an hour, depending on how they're used. We'd like to do it after every visit, but whether that's possible or not, I don't know. We've got antibacterial gels in the toilets, every single toilet as well, so people can use those too. It's really hard, isn't it? Because our people need to use toilets. We did consider getting portaloos. Then we felt that actually we've got the same problem with cleaning those as well, although they would be outside and we wouldn't have the issue with the corridor. So we're going to trial the priority system for people walking in and out, and we're going to trial how frequently the toilets are actually used to how frequently we can clean them. But that's a policy for the moment.
It'll be interesting to hear how that pans out, actually, won't it? One probably for all of you, but Dominic, can we hear you again? Because I think I heard your computer ping. So
Let's try. Can you hear me now?
We can, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay.
Do you want to answer that original question? Sorry, I think you answered it online.
Yeah, so the two questions I didn't answer online were the ones about table service and takeaways. And so I'd like to answer them now. But just before I do that, I think going to Sam's point, I completely agree with your approach, Sam. It's very much, what lawyers and government people call a risk-based approach. You can discharge your duty of care in many different ways, and the guidance is there as guidance. If you don't follow the guidance, you'll be on the back foot if something's happened, but you would not necessarily have been found to breach your duty of care if you don't do everything to the letter. Equally, you could do everything to the letter, but do something else stupid that's not covered and still find yourself guilty of a breach of duty. So that in mind, I'll move on to the questions. You were just talking, I think, about toilets. There is a section in the guidance, it comes on page 31, about hygiene, hand washing, sanitation facilities and toilets. So have a look at that, section 5.4, to do with the restaurant guidance. So I think Nick could probably answer the first question from Lucy better, if not at least as well as I could, which is, yes, I mean, you can do takeaways from your hatch, and in many ways that's encouraged. What's important is that if you're giving people takeaways to have on your vineyard, you have a system in place where they've got a safe area to go to where they're not going to be too close to anyone else. So that's fine. The other question, I think, is a simpler answer in that the 1 meter plus versus 2 meters and the live entertainment applies to both indoors and outdoors. So you are, in theory, allowed to do the 1 meter plus outdoors if you can't do 2 meters. Now, I don't imagine there's that many vineyards that are so tight on space outside that they would need to invoke the 1 meter plus for their outside tables. So I think while in theory, if you're in a city space, obviously your outdoor area is very limited, you can do the 1 meter plus tables. But in a vineyard, you should only be doing that if you absolutely can't maintain the 2 meters. So I think that answers Lisa's question.
That's great. I'm very aware that we're just starting now to go over time, and we do try and keep it to an hour, although not unsurprisingly, we were expecting quite a lot of questions being asked. Let's just sort of round up in a minute. There's one question actually Art Tucker asked. Picnics is a good idea. Hustinus and Stellenbosch work well. Do you provide the ingredients, so the fresh bread, the smoked salmon, etc.? Is that difficult, or has that been difficult with COVID? What if people pick something up and put it back? And also, if the weather isn't good, is there suddenly a lot of wastage? How do you sort of work with that? Now, you've obviously been doing Picnic Sam. Is there anything that you'd like to comment on that?
Yes, sure. The way we've handled it is very much to make sure that the chefs in the kitchen have antibacterial in the kitchen, they have gloves that they frequently change in the kitchen, and they're wearing masks the whole time. So we're handling the food in the kitchen as safely as we possibly can. And then once that happens, that everything's boxed up at the moment in boxes. So it leaves the kitchen in a sealed box if it's a picnic box. So that's already handled as safely as we can. So everything would be in that box. When we bring people into the cafe, as I said, the servers will have gloves on, they'll have face screens on. They have been trained to take the food on a plate to the customers, making sure there's nobody else wandering around. So they go directly to the table. The tables are spread in a way that they can easily do it with 2 meters social distancing. We're being very careful. The one thing, can I just have one thought that I think is relevant to everything I've heard? We've been, as I said, we've been open doing the food parcels and selling wine for a while now. And one of the biggest issues I think we're all going to face as we go forward here is not what we're doing, it's what your customers do. And one of the things that we've witnessed is actually customers not socially distancing and not following rules and guidelines. They are actually your trickiest problem. And we've had somebody who came in who immediately put their hand out to shake somebody's hand right back at the beginning, who my member of staff automatically shook his hand and then turned around and looked in horror at me. And I just pointed to the antibacterial gels and get there now. But it is very difficult. We are all going to have to make sure that we ensure that our customers follow the systems and the guidelines that we've put in place. And if you don't, all that work we're doing falls apart. And that, I think, is going to be the hardest thing, because people are getting a lot more lax than they were. Certainly some people are.
That's a very salutary point, actually, isn't it?
Can I just add to that there is provision in the guidance, it's in my bullet points, that says you should brief people in advance. So when they made a booking, send them an email, set out the instructions in there. Yeah. And when they arrive, again, reiterate what they're expected to do.
We should be wrapping up in a minute, but actually one question I thought would be quite interesting, and actually those of you that have asked questions since, what we'll do, if I may ask you panelists to answer them, and we'll make sure that we publish them up on the website. What do you think of the tourist board certificates for COVID-19 safety? Have they been of any use? Will they be helpful to businesses? I don't know whether you've had experience of that, Dominic. Have you had a chance to look at some?
No, I mean, I'm sure that, you know, for some people they would provide some reassurance. I can't say in practice because I don't run them. I don't know if Sam or Nick have used them.
No, I haven't. We haven't done that. We've taken our own path where we send we send out to our customers, and we've got posted up saying this is what we do, this is how we're protecting you, this is how we're protecting our staff. I actually hadn't crossed my mind to even think about doing that, to be honest.
Well, it sounds like you're doing all the measures yourselves and actually being very thorough about it. And with Dominic's help and advice on all those slides, there's a great deal to digest this evening as well. I've noticed that numbers are starting to move because our hour is most definitely up. We've overrun by 5 minutes. We could overrun by 25 minutes, but I know you've all got places to go to as well. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Dominic and Sam and Nick, for your expertise, for sharing all the information. There's a lot to digest, and just to remind everybody, the recording of this will be up as soon as possible. Hopefully we'll have it up tomorrow, and all three speakers are very kindly agreed to share their slides, which we'll put on the members area of the site so that people can download them for their own use. Next week, it's actually moving back to the vineyard, and it's the first of the canopy management sessions. So tune in for that. That's at 6 o'clock. You can register on the website as usual, but for the moment, thanks to everybody. Thanks for everybody for attending. And again, to our speakers, many thanks and good night.